So great. I'm going to go ahead just to honor everyone's time as you're here today. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on paying for graduate school. Hopefully this will be helpful for you. Every year we try to figure out ways to try to help students and families where they are. And so we know that a lot of people do want to attend graduate school. You're just always worried about, but I don't want to have to pay for it, or I don't want to have to take out more loans to make that happen. And so thank you for joining us today to learn some different avenues and different ways to make it happen. If you're not familiar with CFNC, we are, of course, sort of a free comprehensive website here in North Carolina. Most of the information that we provide, of course, is going to be around planning and applying for college here in North Carolina. Obviously, if you found out about this webinar and you're not in North Carolina, we welcome you. Definitely visit cfnc.org because it is a website with a wealth of information about applying for college, planning for college. And if you have questions while you're on the site, we do have a toll-free call center that you can call to gather more information, but definitely visit the site after today just to gather more information and get back getting ready for your college process. So just so you'll learn a little bit about who is talking to you and the facilitators we have. So yeah, my name is Tamika Ruffin. I am one of the regional representatives for College Foundation of North Carolina. We also have Ms. Devin McCarthy James. She is one of our regional representatives in the western part of North Carolina. And then we also have on here Dr. April Query. She is our sort of regional and community services manager for the whole state of North Carolina. And we'll be kind of answering questions. So if you see our names pop up in the chat, or if you see something from us in the chat, you'll know who that's coming from. But thank you again for joining us. We're going to introduce the, oh my goodness. We're going to introduce the speakers in just a second, so you'll get an opportunity to do that, to know who you're talking to and who are the great panelists we have today. Hopefully what you'll learn from today is kind of where to begin, kind of what does North Carolina offer to help pay for graduate school, and then obviously we're going to get to what you want to hear from and the people that you want to hear from, which is our wonderful panelists. We'll absolutely allow you an opportunity to ask questions today. So where do you begin? So with most people, one of the kind of foundations when it comes to kind of getting money for college in general, we always tell people and encourage you to fill out the FAFSA. So of course, it stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The way that you get to the website now is you can go to the studentaid.gov website. To make it even easier to go directly to the application, you can go to studentaid.gov/FAFSA. And of course, this is the main application. Some of you may be familiar with this from your undergraduate study. It is also still the base for graduate study as well. One of the reasons why a lot of colleges like for students to fill them out, of course, is just to make sure that you're kind of being considered for any types of institutional money that they may have through their financial aid office that is specifically for graduate level students. So it's so important that you fill it out just to see, right, what's out there. It also gives you the option to, of course, giving the option to be able to borrow money if you like to borrow money to help pay for your expenses or you need it. That's how you're able to get access to the student loan portion of it, is to fill out the FAFSA. If it's been a while since you filled it out, you do have to create a username and password just like you do with any other website. They do also require that you create an FSA ID. So an ID number is kind of going to be your signature for this application. So at the end of it, they're going to ask you for your signature. And because you can't physically sign it on this application online, they do have you to sign it with your ID number. And so it's going to be important that you create an ID number. Of course, you'll select the colleges that you're interested in attending graduate study, and then you'll provide the main kind of bulk of the applications. You're providing some of your tax information. Currently, the way the application works is that you're providing your prior year tax information. So if you are planning to start this coming up fall, for instance, let's say you're thinking about fall, you'll be providing your 2021 tax information. This application actually opens up every October 1st. So once you are thinking about the timeline of when do I need to do what when it comes to this application, you always want to think about you're filling out the FAFSA application the year prior to you starting your graduate education at whatever school you're thinking about doing. But definitely visit the website if you want to kind of start that process. Now, kind of keep in mind, I always like to tell people, because I know if you did this in undergraduate study, you were used to, of course, being considered for some certain grants, some federal and state grant programs. However, once you start after you get past your bachelor's degree, the only thing that you're technically eligible for through the federal process are going to be student loans. And so I always like to make sure that you are at least aware of what your options are when it comes to borrowing money. The most that they allow graduate students to borrow is definitely a little bit more than the undergraduate. It's $20,500 per year. One of the reasons why they do have this amount is because sometimes people do choose to not work full time. Maybe they want to be part time. So you may need funds to help with living expenses. And so do understand that they will have an option for that amount as a graduate student. With the student loans, the only thing I do tell students to be sure that you do is that you check what the current interest rates are on student loans. So every July 1st, student loans interest rates change. So you want to be sure that before you sign that paperwork to say, yes, I do need to take out, even if it's $1,000 or $2,000 to help pay for my studies, what is the current interest rate? And so just be sure that you're checking to see what that is. With the financial aid office, so that you'll be aware. I also want you to know too, they do have graduate, they sort of have limits as far as how much you can borrow throughout your total sort of education. So for some of you, depending on where you went to undergraduate school or how many degrees you have up until this point, there is a limit as far as how much you can borrow in total. And so you'll see at the very bottom, what they have is the sort of total limit that students can borrow throughout pretty much their lifetime when it comes to the federal loans. So when you're thinking about, am I going to go to graduate school in-state or out of state, or what are my options? How much have I taken out up to this point, and how will that affect my current limit if you are thinking about taking out loans or need to do that throughout the process? The other thing I want to mention is that most financial aid offices are going to also offer you a chance to take out private student loans. So sometimes students are looking for kind of all of their options to consider when it comes to, if I'm going to take out a loan and I have to look at the interest rates for these loans, what are my options? And this is something that we highly recommend here in North Carolina, is that before you sign any paperwork for college, that for one, you compare all of your options. So you'll have the loans that I mentioned through the FAFSA process, but colleges are also going to give you a listing of other people that allow students to take out loans for college. Because the loan industry there's a lot of competition in there. One of the things that our state wanted to do was to create an option for you that would have low interest rates and things like that, so that you can have something to compare when it comes to what you consider to take out for loans. So if you are interested in starting sort of comparing different loans, the rates, how long they give you to apply, the loan fees, definitely visit ncassist.org. It's a nonprofit lender, and so they're going to try to make sure that they give you the most competitive rate when it comes to if you had to borrow to help pay for graduate studies. So definitely visit ncassist.org. And just so you're aware too, what else does North Carolina offer when it comes to that? So you understand that you're going to start the process by filling out the FAFSA. They're going to give you the loan options, but what else does North Carolina offer to help you pay for graduate school? A very big program that we do have, and some people are not as aware of it as we'd like, is our North Carolina Forgivable Education Loan for Service program. We call it FAILS for short, just because, again, that is a long title. This is for certain programs here in our state. So for certain programs, the state will essentially give you money to help pay for college. As long as when you graduate, you work in that field for every year that you receive those funds. You will never have to pay that money back. So I know some of you see the loans word in there and you're like, is this a scholarship or is this a loan? It's initially given to you as a scholarship. However, your commitment once you receive any type of scholarship funds through here is that you do have to work in that field in the state of North Carolina for every year that you receive money for college. If you're interested in learning about what programs are eligible through the FAILS program, I definitely encourage you to go to cfnc.org. /FELS. Most of the scholarship programs are going to be around the areas of education and healthcare, because that is where we do have a great need here in our state. And I'll go ahead and give you a sort of a quick snapshot. So if you are thinking about going to certain careers in the health industry or anything in education. These are some programs that currently are covered under this state scholarship program. For graduate studies, students can get up to $14,000 per year to help pay for their study. So definitely go to the website. Typically, the application opens up in January of every year. We did recently close the application for this year. It closed on March 1st, but it reopens every year. So even if you are thinking about going to graduate school this fall and you missed the deadline for this year, you will have the opportunity to apply again next year. So if you are thinking about any of these areas, we highly encourage you to apply, and definitely read the information that's on the site to do so. Also, I want to be sure that here in North Carolina, we do participate in the 529 plan, which is sort of an education savings plan. So sometimes people, of course, one of the ways that they use to help pay for college is that maybe you are able to pay a little bit out of pocket. And we encourage you that if you are thinking about paying any expenses out of pocket, that you do put it into a 529 or college savings account. One of the benefits of kind of putting money there is that, for one, of course, while that money is sitting there before you need to use it, hopefully it's going to earn a little bit of interest on your money. So that's an advantage of it. And then you also are going to get a statement at the end of the year that's going to show you how much money you saved, and you'll be able to use it on your taxes when you file your taxes every year. So it's a great opportunity to be able to have money to be able to use for your college expenses. And then also you'll sort of get that tax deduction. One of the things I also want to mention is that there are other several uses to be able to use that money. So if you were thinking that you were going to use it for graduate school and then thought, maybe I don't need to use it for graduate school, but I have children, you can always save it and switch their name as the beneficiary for that money. You can use it for K through 12 tuition, and also for apprenticeship programs that a lot of students now are considering doing at community colleges. You can also use it now for student loan repayment. So one of the cool things is let's say that you do hear about a scholarship opportunity from one of our panelists or something that they mentioned, and you don't need the money that you save for college. If you have student loans that you're currently paying on, you can use that money that's in there to repay up to $10,000 in student loan repayment. So that's also an option, that if you don't use it for school yourself, that you can use that money to help repay a student loan. So definitely visit cfnc.org/NC529 if you like to enroll. It's a great way to kind of put your money aside. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Devin, and she's going to introduce us to our wonderful panelists for today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Devin McCarthy James, and I'm really excited about our panel today to talk about paying for graduate school. The folks on our panel have a variety of experiences, professional and personal, that kind of lead them into being wonderful resources for this topic. So let me tell you a little bit about our panelists today before we dive in. So first, we have Mr. Blaze Gorley. He is a higher education professional with Queen's University. He has experience with a variety of roles at different institutions, and under the admissions umbrella, he has experience in undergraduate, international, and graduate admissions roles. He's also gone through the process of seeking financial support in both undergrad and graduate studies, and shared he's very excited to assist others in their valuable pursuit of post-undergraduate education. We also have Dr. Julie Goodliff. She is currently the Assistant Dean of the Graduate School for Funding and Research at UNC Charlotte. And she brings a wealth of knowledge, both personally and professionally, about paying for graduate school. She began her career as a scientist, earned a PhD in molecular biology and genetics at Johns Hopkins University, which was 100% paid for by the university or the National Institute of Health. She later joined UNC Charlotte as an assistant professor of biological sciences, and sometime later went back to school and earned an MBA, for which this time she had to take out loans. Although she's hopeful that the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program will help her growing loan balance, a large part of her job now is to help students avoid going into large amounts of debt. Mr. Dean Heath is a career educator. Do we have Mr. Heath on here? I haven't seen him yet. Maybe not. Okay. We have him on standby. We'll see if we can't get him on here. Dr. Eric Brady is the director for biomedical graduate programs at Wake Forest University. He trained as a PhD in organometallic chemistry at Vanderbilt University, following completion of an undergraduate degree from Appalachian State. He then found his true calling as an administrator, and his full-time role at Wake Forest includes full operational responsibility for 18 biomedical graduate degree programs, spanning marketing and recruiting, curriculum oversight, graduation, and alumni development. So we've got a really great panel here today, lots of wonderful expertise to kind of fuel this conversation. So I think what we're going to do now is just kind of feature our speakers. So we're going to turn off the PowerPoint so you can kind of see us as we're speaking on the whole. So the very first thing I wanted to kick off with, and I think we're going to start with you, Mr. Gorley, since you have this admissions sort of experience under your belt. If you are considering graduate school, for somebody who's looking into it right now, what is the timeline for applications and finding funding and financial aid?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be part of this with you today. When it comes to timing, it really just depends on the program that you're pursuing, right? Certain programs are going to have a process where you apply a year advance. Others are going to be more short term. In the instance of Queen's University, for instance, I work in our McCall School of Business, and for our deadlines, they're a little bit closer to when you begin classes because we're designed for full-time working professionals primarily. So for instance, our summer start date has a priority deadline of April 15th, but those classes begin May 15th. Different programs are going to have different deadlines, but the important thing for you to know is if you're considering a program, you should start that process as early as possible. The reason being, the more time you have, the more opportunities you have to seek additional funding and to make a good choice, because it's always important to do your research, check out a variety of different programs before landing on the one that you believe will help you reach your professional goals.
Wonderful. That's great advice. So starting as early as possible. You know, Dr. Brady, Dr. Goodliffe, is there anything you want to add to that in terms of what the timing looks like in your programs?
I'm happy to add on to that. I think one of the things that it's good for you to have some perspective on is how competitive the nature of the program is that you're going after. So, Dr. Goodliffe's opening description mentioned that her PhD was fully funded, as was mine. Well, you can guess that PhD programs are going to be more competitive because your need to gather funding to pay for your graduate education is a lot more muted in a PhD program. And so you will find in general, the PhD program applications are going to be well in advance of the start of term. As an example, most of my PhD programs have August start dates, and their application deadlines are going to be in December of the previous year. Now, for our master's degree programs, though, where there is an expectation of students paying tuition, our application deadlines are going to slide well closer to the actual start date of the program, much as Mr. Gorley was just mentioned. So, you know, some of our master's degree programs will have application deadlines as early as January 15th for a summer start. The same program has a fall admission deadline as well that has a May 1st deadline. So they're going to be closer. But I think my initial comment about the competitiveness of programs is always going to play into it, because genetic counseling, which is a master's degree program, is my single most competitive program to get into. And it also has a application deadline that matches PhD programs in many regards. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add that the FAFSA is due early, you know, so if you're going to start in the fall, you need your FAFSA in March or so, maybe April that year. And FELS application, right? That is sometime in the spring before fall. And same with other scholarships. We have scholarships for all sorts of students, and those are due in March of the year before. So if you are considering grad school, right now is the time to find funding for a fall start.
That's great advice. I love what y'all are saying about, you know, really paying attention to the competitiveness. That's because that's definitely going to change sort of some of that timeline for you, and definitely those applications, right? So the FAFSA in our state, in North Carolina, doesn't have necessarily a hard and fast deadline, but in other states it does. So if you're looking out of state, that's something to consider. And in general, our rule of thumb is it opens October 1st. At the soonest opportunity you think you might go to graduate school the next year, that's the time to fill out the FAFSA. Pretty much as soon as it opens and you're aware of it, that's a great time. And yes, those FELS applications do come due March 1st every year. So it's super helpful if you're aware of what programs you're going into, or at least your general plan before that, so you can try and take advantage of that funding. While we're talking about different kinds of funding, I think it's really important, and I think some of this is really institutional based, right? How this looks at different institutions is going to be a little bit different, different programs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But just to kick us off, Dr. Goodliff, I was wondering if you could start us off by talking about what may be some sources of funding outside of maybe the ones we've already talked about that you've seen students use at your institution, or that are specifically available at institutions that you know of.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that. We have a program, and I know a lot of North Carolina universities have this, if not all, where students with assistantships, particularly doctoral students on a teaching or research assistantship, their tuition is paid for. So in North Carolina, somebody's got to pay. There are no waivers like private schools or other state schools may have, but our university spends about, I don't know, $12 million a year to pay tuition for all of our doctoral students, and a little bit of fees. So you'd still owe about $1,500 for the academic year as a doc student. But that's a huge bill that gets paid for, especially if you're out of state. It's, $22,000 where you get tuition and the health insurance premium for the student health program. So doc students at UNC Charlotte have that paid for, along with the stipend. And we have minimum stipends for doc students now that actually most programs have exceeded something like $18,500 for 9 months, but most of them are above $21,000 now. Now that's okay. It's not a whole lot of money. So students often also borrow. So they've got tuition paid for with the stipend and a little bit of money. A little bit. I recommend borrowing as little as you possibly can. So that's for doc students. Master students, starting 23-24, this coming fall, any master student holding a TA with the minimum stipend, and that is $14,000 for master students, will have their tuition paid for at the North Carolina rate. So if you're out of state, you still have a big bill to pay, but any North Carolina resident who holds a teaching assistantship will have a big chunk of their bill paid for by the graduate school, which is Academic Affairs University. So there's a lot of money there, and we also have a summer fellowship program for doc students, which is $8,000 in the summer, and it's a competitive application. So each year we have reviewers review, and so there is summer money for doc students. Am I answering all the questions? I think I'll stop now. Let's
got it. I actually had a couple of follow-ups based on all that great information that you just gave. For folks who aren't familiar with what an assistantship or a fellowship is, can you talk a little bit about what that entails to get those funds? Yes.
Assistantships are a particular type of employment which isn't exactly like regular employment. There's a synergy between an assistantship and a student's education and the mission of the university. So if you're a teaching assistant, you're contributing to the teaching mission of the university, while also, gaining experience in teaching. And so that's a special type of employment. If you're a research assistant, that it is actually under federal law, an educational opportunity, and not an employment. It's not supposed to be employment, but supposed to be research that contributes to your dissertation or your thesis, your education in some way. So those are opportunities that are special and only for graduate students. Undergrads can't get them. Once you graduate from grad school, you can't get it unless you enroll in something else. So it's special, it's particular for graduate students, money to help them in their education or in contributing to the teaching mission of the institution.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for clarifying that, because I know it's a very different kind of role than you might find, outside of university, and probably varies a little bit from university to university. Dr. Brady, do you want to chime in and talk about how things like that are handled at your university?
Sure. A private institution is going to be a little bit different, right? Because we're not getting a state allocation. So in general terms, stipend dollars that are paid, and I did drop in the chat that it is, there's a lot of news going on right now about what a stipend is. And in reality, there's some disagreement amongst many universities about whether it's a salary or if it's a stipend. And we at Wake Forest tend to treat it as a stipend, where it's a grant that is specific to cover your living expenses. And so, yes, you are being awarded a stipend because you are performing research as a part of your doctoral study. Now, on my campus in particular, all of my programs are on the School of Medicine campus, where there are no undergraduates. And so teaching assistantships are very, very limited for PhD students in my world. But a lot of that actually kind of keeps it actually is helpful to us from a legal perspective, because we don't generally have to try to thread that needle of what it is a teaching assistant a job or not. But in general terms, a lot of institutions are going to offer, the potential to serve as a teaching assistant, where you might, as a general rule, as a PhD student, you might teach a couple of labs, in exchange for your stipend. It certainly sounds like an employment contract to me. So I'll say it that way. But on the master's side, our financial model really at Wake Forest is we try to offer a graduate school funded partial tuition scholarship for as much as we can. So I have part of my duties include profit and loss and understanding how much the teaching costs within a specific program. Knowing what my enrollment goals are and as long as we're hitting our enrollment targets, that allows us to back into a calculation that tells us how much tuition scholarship percentage we can offer. Our master's degree programs in general are going to offer you at the point of admission, no less than a 24% partial tuition scholarship off of our full tuition. And we're, and then for other programs that are thesis based, where we know you're going to be with us for longer than a year, but you're going to consume fewer teaching resources as a student in advanced years, we're going to elevate that tuition scholarship so that because we can pass those savings on to students. Now, that doesn't cover the full cost, right, of a graduate degree, especially in our master's degree program at Wake Forest. And it's why being prepared and having your financial books in order when you decide to go to graduate school is highly advised. The more money that you can find in advance of coming to graduate school means the less that you're taking out in loans and the less you're paying back over time. So I think these are kind of key things to keep in mind. But yeah, I meant to mention, with the stipend levels that Dr. Goodliff was mentioning. Our biomedical graduate programs at this point are offering a stipend of $36,000 a year, which is more than the cost of living in Winston-Salem, which effectively makes you ineligible for additional aid at Wake Forest.
Wow. Okay. So far I'm getting from both of you that, most students are going to have to utilize a variety of sources to kind of put together the total cost of attendance, maybe through their own savings, maybe through some institutional programs, maybe through some loans, kind of trying to figure out how that puzzle fits together. Do you find that to be the case too, Mr. Gorley? Do you find that, some of that institutional funds, you have some programs there, but then you also have some students that need to go to outside sources?
Yes, this is very frequent that people will use multiple places to get grants or scholarships and use that towards that bottom line cost for their programs. So firstly, I want to commend those who are part of this event and who are learning this information ahead of time, because this is one area where you're going to see that direct return on investment for time that you spend, right? The time that you spend learning about how you can get scholarships, how you can get grants and decrease the cost of paying for graduate school or even doctoral programs is going to be very valuable for you. So what we see kind of at Queens, I'm going to cover a few different areas that people can get funds specific to our school, and then also some wider opportunities that you can apply if you were looking at a different school or even looking at a different program. So what we see here at Queens is that frequently students will pursue a variety of means. Firstly, our McCall School of Business, for our graduate programs particularly, offer scholarships. So you're considered for those scholarships when you apply for the program. So that's a really nice place to start. But we also have corporate partnerships, and these corporate partnerships that we have with places like Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools, like Ally Financial, and many, many others are partnerships that we've made with these companies where we offer an additional discount for tuition. So a 10% tuition discount for employees of these different corporate partners. And that applies to any of our graduate programs, not just specific to the McCall School of Business. And then lastly, as with some universities, students who pursue graduate assistantships and or come and work full-time at a university. When you're pursuing your graduate school, you may not be coming straight out of undergrad, right? You may have multiple years of teaching experience or work experience, or be looking for employment and also an opportunity to further your education. And at Queens, we offer a tuition remission that pays for that tuition for the most part. Of course, there are some acceptances to certain programs and all of that are available to our students. But when you branch out further than past Queens, some things that may be important for our viewers today is that there is oftentimes employer support. If you work for a company, I'll just use T-Mobile as an example. If you work for T-Mobile, then they offer a standard scholarship, so to speak, for you to pursue higher education. And that's part of your employee benefits. It's very much a standardized thing. And a lot of these companies have them. So certainly reach out to your HR department, check out your employee handbooks and see if maybe you're eligible for something you didn't even know you had. So certainly pursue that. And then also you want to think about if you're military or someone in your family is military, there's some additional benefits that you may be eligible for, such as the GI Bill. And then lastly, something is to continue searching for those scholarships. This, like I said, this is where you put in that direct time and energy and you're going to see a financial return. And it's very exciting when you get those opportunities. So use search tools. I've seen Scholarship Owl is one. FastWeb has one, US News and World Report, and CFNC also has a search tool. So definitely use those, utilize all your resources to try and bring down that cost for you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the shout out. We always appreciate that. So yes, we do have a scholarship search on the CFNC website. We also have lots of just general information about what to expect with paying for college. So definitely, if you're looking to get some in-depth information about scholarships, grants, things like that, what does it mean? What am I looking at? We've got tons and tons of information on that. And so you mentioned a whole bunch of stuff, and I really appreciate that because you've really dove into a lot of different types of students, even, right? Students who might be coming from sort of a larger corporate atmosphere where they might get tuition reimbursement or, other funds to further their education. You talked about military, which is always, obviously in North Carolina, we are a big military state. So we love to see our military take advantage of those opportunities that are afforded to them for education. I'm sort of curious because I know that at Queens, you will have a variety of different kinds of students, right? So, can you talk a little bit about, is there anything that you would recommend to maybe an international student or a student who's not got that traditional background that we might expect?
Yes, that's a great question, and something that really creates a different search process and a different way of acquiring funds for education. At Queen's University, we actually have a lot of students that come from other countries. And one good point of information is that if you are pursuing a private institution, frequently, and as the case for Queen's, that tuition is going to be the same cost, whether you are in state or out of state or out of the country, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Also, the scholarships that McCall School of Business offers specifically for their business graduate programs, international students are eligible for as well. So that's important to keep in mind as well. So you want to kind of look and see what those opportunities are and see what kind of support you can get. I would recommend, if you were considering Queens or any other business school or any other school in general for graduate admissions, reach out to those admissions coordinators, those counselors, those supporters, and find out this information, because today kind of serves as a quick refill at a gas station to propel you forward. But you certainly need to continue gaining more and more information. And a lot of it will be institutional specific. So reach out to those people. That's what they're there for. They're there to help you and support you. And our university in particular has a center specifically for international students where we support with all of those things like I-20s and information and questions about how the admissions process may look different. And other universities frequently have those as well, but you may not find them online. So make those calls, send those emails, and really don't be afraid to do that, because you're also putting yourself out there showing, hey, I'm interested in this program and I want to be part of your university. And I can tell you from admissions, we love to see that.
That's great advice. I mean, I really think that that's great advice no matter what you're looking to go into, right? Try to make those connections, reach out, find the people to talk to, show that demonstrated interest, and, kind of learn more about that program, that culture, those opportunities that are there for you. Absolutely. And that is going to vary so much from college to college. I wanted to kind of turn back over to the UNC system to see if maybe Dr. Goodliff had anything to add to some of that, because I know these are all very different institutions. So I was just curious if there's anything you would recommend to different types of students considering going back to grad school.
Absolutely. The business school is more expensive than other schools, other colleges, because they've done their market analysis and they know the return on investment is greater with many business degrees than other types of degrees. So you should expect that. You should expect, there are expensive programs, but they are definitely related to what you're going to earn when you're finished. And so one thing to be aware of is make sure you're not overpaying for something that, let's say you're getting a master's in philosophy. That should not cost you a whole lot of money, right? That's not an MBA where you can look up, what do the graduates from Queens earn the first year out of their MBA. Don't borrow more than that much money, but certainly that is something you can borrow a little bit more money for than, say, a less lucrative career. Now, if you're going into one of the FELS eligible fields, you've got a good bet that you're going to get that scholarship is going to remain a scholarship and it'll be forgiven. And now you're an educator or a counselor or a medical professional in North Carolina. Those are worth, like occupational therapy or chiropractor or something. Those are going to be more expensive, but if you can get the forgivable loan, that's good. Same with like social work and education. The federal student loan forgiveness program should help you there, because if you go to work in a nonprofit or government later on and do that for 10 years, those loans can be forgiven. Yeah, that counseling. So it's very, very, even within the UNC system, it's very, very program specific. There's some part-time programs, like a part-time educational leadership program that people can, if they work at the university provides that tuition benefit to its employees, and most of our educational leadership doc students are actually working at the university and take 3 hours a semester that's totally paid for by the university. So every program is very different, and definitely be aware of the return on the investment, including, the considerations of any forgivable loan that you could find.
Absolutely. I love that we keep coming back to forgivable loans, because it's really, it's the best kind of loan to have, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I will say, one big difference to point out to make sure everybody understands. So we've talked about the FELS, right? The North Carolina program, and that is a 1-to-1. So for every year you receive that loan, you have to do 1 year of service in North Carolina. Now, the public service loans are different in that you have to demonstrate service for up to 10 years at this point. That may change in the future, but it's worth noting that the programs are handled very differently. So I just want to make sure that that's clear, that, one program is the 1-to-1, and then the other one is more like you work 10 years and then the whole thing, whatever you have left to pay.
Yeah, and hopefully they actually forgive the loan instead of stringing you along and tell you made a mistake 5 years ago. Yeah, no,
Right.
the FELS money is awesome. I see it in students' accounts, and it pays the entire bill. And I'm always so happy when I see that.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm biased, but I think that our FELS program is great. So I just wanted to clarify that difference, because you can obviously seek forgiveness for more than just the FELS majors if you're in public service, but it takes a lot longer. So I just wanted to kind of point that piece out. And I also like that you mentioned that return on investment, right? It's important to look at what is your future potential earnings going to be compared to your student loan ratio, right? Like you have to really think about, how much is of that future income is going to have to be paid back, right, in loans, and what's that really going to look like, and that impact on your life, right? Because the goal is to get into that job that you're interested in, but hopefully not be destitute once you get into it, right? So thank you so much for mentioning that, because I think that is a really important piece to do that research on. Dr. Brady, what other things are we kind of needing to hear about from your neck of the woods in terms of this conversation?
Well, I think, just to kind of extend on a thought that was kind of coming out there at the very tail end of this last portion, schools should be able to give you some sense of the outcomes of their graduates. And so if you're going to make an investment, if you believe that graduate education is an investment, and we do, the reality is that the schools ought to be able to tell you about their job placement statistics and whether their students are in fact gaining employment beyond the degree. Graduate school is never a means to an end, right? It's a place, it's something we do to take the next step in the world. And so you ought to be able to get data out of schools that you're interested in about how successfully their graduates have found jobs and or moved on to the next step. Because there are, in my view, there are at least two major branches of graduate education. One is, I want to go to work in this specific field. And for me, that would represent programs like medical physics, where I'm completing a master's so that I can be a medical physicist, or genetic counseling because I want to be a genetic counselor. And then we also have preparatory programs that are actually preparing me for something else, right? So we have a biomedical science master's program that is tailored specifically for students who need some help crossing the bridge from undergraduate into medical school or into PA programs. So preparatory programs, those types of programs should be able to tell you about how successfully they've gotten students into the next step program. More career-focused degree programs should be able to tell you about where their graduates have gone and how successful they've been. And I think that's a kind of a key point it's not so much about preparing yourself to pay for school, but it does validate why you're doing it, right? And why it's important to me to try to do this this graduate degree, because I want to know that investing this money is actually going to result in the outcome that I started off for.
Great advice. I absolutely, I say similar things to students all the time. So I love hearing it from a professional at the graduate school level. It's really validating for me that I'm saying the right things, because this is coming from sort of the horse's mouth, so to speak. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. I did want to ask just a question about, I know we've been talking a lot about master's programs and doctoral programs, but is there also funding available for things like certificate programs, or maybe if I was going part-time, not a full-time course load, things like that. Are there opportunities for students like that, or is that kind of something that's expected to be kind of pay as you go? And that's open to anybody that has, because I know different programs have different, things of that nature.
I can start this one. So we do have a couple of certificates available at Wake Forest, but there is a history of gainful employment legislation that required that in order to access federal funding for certificate programs, the burden fell to universities to show that the securing of that certificate was actually going to result in some sort of tangible benefit to the person that secured the certificate. Now those laws are actually not in effect currently. So I think it might actually be easier to access federal student loan dollars to pursue certificates. I think that's true. A financial aid officer could answer that question better than I can. But you're absolutely right, Devin. The reality of the situation is certificate programs are often very much just you pay per credit hour. The benefit of a certificate program is generally certificates are a smaller number of credit hours, so your investment is less. But on the flip side, I have spoken to, we had a graduate degree program that was for physicians to advance themselves as physician leaders. And we explored a certificate program as an offshoot of that master's degree. And some of the feedback that we got from those practicing physicians when we said, well, would a certificate program interest you, was, well, if my institution is going to invest in my education and try to advance me, I think they're going to expect a greater credential than a certificate. And so I think that's just some valuable things to think about. Yes, a certificate is an educational unit that can provide value to you. The question that is somewhat unresolved in my own mind is whether it secures you the same ability to advance that a master's or a doctoral degree does.
Mm-hmm. And I'll mention that to be eligible for the unsubsidized loans, students have to enroll in half-time.
At least half-time.
At least half-time. And so at the graduate level at UNC Charlotte, 9 hours is full-time. Half-time would be 4.5. You can't really enroll in 4.5, so that's 5 hours to be offered loans at UNC Charlotte. Right. And certain certificate programs are eligible for those loans. The way our financial aid office considers it is if that certificate, if those credit hours can lead to like a master's and the next degree. We have some teaching licensure certificates that you get a teaching certificate and that goes into your master's of arts and teaching, or MED. And so those are eligible for some loans. So each program is a little bit different though, probably at every university also.
So just to clarify, was that like a stackable credential kind of situation where the certificate leads into that's great. I love programs like that. That's very cool. Thank you for mentioning that. I think that's a trend lately that we're seeing. A lot more colleges and universities are offering, sort of stackable credentials so you can kind of take it in chunks, so to speak, right?
We haven't started doing this notion of micro-credentialing or anything like that. But I think certificates, we've never had a certificate that wasn't closely aligned to a degree program. And so the notion of the certificate is kind of a way to dip your toe in the water. And then you can decide, you know what, I do want to go all the way and secure the master's degree. Can be a nice return on your investment as well, that you've already paid for some of the coursework that would have been required. And at Wake, I can tell you that we wouldn't say, well, sorry, you took those courses as a certificate student. They don't count towards your master's. That is not the practice. Mm-hmm. The practice is to recognize that, yep, you've invested in us, and now, now you're well on your way to securing the degree.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. And so for those that are not entirely certain, they're thinking about it, they're not sure, 100%, this is a really good option to, like he said, put your toes in and see if it's really for you, and, hopefully find some funding while you're considering it, right?
And especially if a student is a current master's or a doctoral student and has their tuition paid for. So in North Carolina, once you pay for 9 hours, you can add as many hours as you want and you don't pay extra for those. So if you get your 9 hours paid for, you can add a certificate. So we have hundreds of students who are, sort of PhD in something like sociology, and they're adding a data science certificate to really beef up their employability. That happens. That's probably the majority of our certificate students, honestly.
That's great. So I wanted to kind of do a little bit of a wrap up round. I want to encourage you all to think about one thing that we perhaps haven't shared yet that you really want to make sure that our audience knows, or one thing that you wish you had known, because all of you have gone through this experience. So if you could tell your younger selves something about this process of finding funding for graduate school, what is something that you feel is really important to share with our crew? So I'm going to start with Mr. Gorley again, and we'll kind of work through everybody.
Sure. I wanted to point out two things. First of all, the last question was focused primarily on certificates, but pursuing a graduate degree, for instance, part-time is a very common practice too. So I wanted to mention that piece, and that it's a great way to continue gaining work experience in your field while also furthering your education. So at our university and with many other universities, I'll give you the example for the School of Business, since that's where I focus on. For our MBA program, for our Masters of Science and Talent Org Development, and for upcoming programs that we have, they're designed for full-time working professionals. So you're able to work during the day and then pursue those degrees either online or in the evenings in person. So always know what your options are for what you want to pursue. And as far as something that I would love for each of you to take away, and something that was really important to me during my search, is think about where you want to be. Think about where you want to go in the long term, and make sure that you're pursuing an education that would help you further those goals. It's not just about gaining information in the classroom. It's not just about having a degree or a certificate you can hang on the wall. It's about that holistic development process, the connections that you make, the education you learn, how you can apply it directly. And make sure that you're pursuing a degree, not because any of your family members told you to, not because someone at work recommended it, so you see it's a good role, but say, this works for me personally, and this will tie to my journey. And that's so important, because when you're going through graduate school, pursuing a doctoral program, I imagine, Dr. Brady, I don't have a doctorate yet, but when you're looking at those opportunities, once you have that cemented in your mind, it acts as a cornerstone when you're encountering difficulty, because these programs are not easy, right? And they take that time and energy commitment. So making sure that you know in your mind, this is why I'm pursuing it, makes it that much easier to complete those programs and to know I'm making the right decision.
I love that. Great words of advice. Thank you for that. I'm going to hop over to Dr. Brady. What's something that you want to share with our audience?
So, I tell students all the time, especially when they're considering graduate school punches everyone in the mouth. I don't care who you are, you won't be spared. It will punch you in the mouth. And I think that one of the very best things you can be doing when you're exploring graduate school is being laser focused on fit. Because a great fit, good mentor-mentee interactions, great fit with your peers and with the school itself, can make graduate school one of the very best times of your life. But again, it will punch you in the mouth. And so finding a great fit is going to be the difference between feeling like you're being dusted off and being kicked when you're down. And so I think that's an incredibly important thing to just bear in mind when you're considering graduate school whatsoever. But I think the other key point that I find, because I do virtual info sessions about our programs about every 2 weeks. I'm actually doing one later this afternoon at 4:30. The reality of the situation is that I still run into a whole lot of students that have a whole lot of questions about graduate school, a lot of first generation college graduates who are just utterly unaware of the ins and outs of the things that we've been talking about today. The fact that PhD programs in the sciences are generally fully funded. I'll be on the phone call with somebody and says, well, I'm just trying to figure out if I want to do a master's or a PhD. And I said, do you realize that PhD programs are fully funded? What? So I think that the key takeaway there is I've never run into a graduate school administrator that's like, I don't want to talk to a student about what graduate school's like. And the mistake that you can make is trying to recreate a wheel that's already spinning. reach out to people like us, ask your questions. We are keen to answer them. Everybody that I've ever met that works in higher ed, especially in graduate education, wants to invite you into our pardon my language, cult. Well, welcome to the cult. Come to grad school, and we all are eager to answer your questions. Don't hesitate to ask, but recognize that very busy administrators, you might have to nudge them a second time, because it's always my goal to get back to somebody within 24 hours. But it's very easy for your email to fall below the fold on my screen. And so I'm happy to hear from people, and just recognize you might have to, it's fair game to nudge them once or twice. You're not going to hurt their feelings. It doesn't hurt them at all.
Lovely. And last but never least, Dr. Goodliff, you want to give your words of wisdom?
Oh, the advice has been so good.
I know, hard acts to follow, but
yes. One thing I wish that I knew was the stuff I actually should have known, the fine print, right? The fine print of student loans. At the grad level, it's different from undergrad. Interest begins accruing immediately, and it's high. It's not like a car or a house that you can sell back. The loan is on you as a human being, and you can't get rid of it. I think now the law has changed that if you pay for 25 years, and you still owe money, the government will forgive whatever's left. That's a long time to be paying, even under one of the income-based repayment plans. So be aware of that. The interest accrues immediately, and it's high. And every year, if you don't pay the interest, it gets rolled into your principal. So your principal can literally grow year to year to year, especially if you're a teacher or somebody who isn't earning a whole lot of money and you're on the income-based repayment plan. 10% of your disposable income may never, ever be enough to pay off that loan that keeps growing. So just a warning, be aware of that and get as much forgivable money as possible, or savings or work, or that's my advice. That's something I wish that I had done, was actually read all the fine print that they throw at you when you fill out the FAFSA.
I second that notion. I actually did just recently receive public loan, service loan forgiveness, which was very exciting for me because I did not read the fine print beforehand. I didn't understand how capitalization worked. So if you are thinking about taking out a loan, make sure you understand how capitalization works. Maybe reach out to the business school. They can help you figure all that out. But yes, thank you all so much. This has been wonderful advice. I'm going to ask my partner Tamika to pull up the slides so we can show some information to find some more specifics about these schools, these programs. I think this is the panelist, but the next slide we have some contact information here. So if you need to screenshot it. Unfortunately, we weren't able to have UNCW on with us today, but we have that QR code, which is pretty neat. So you can scan that. There's links, there's email addresses, and these fine folks are just wonderful resources. So I just say, do not hesitate to reach out to them. Hopefully you have learned how friendly and eager to help you all that they really are. And I think that is across the board at institutions. They really are there to help students. So please feel free to reach out as you can. We have been recording this session, so you can get this information again, and we'll of course send a follow-up with some resources and things to our attendees today. So before we go, I just want to remind you of some resources. Of course, we talked about this during the session, CFNC.org, lots of resources, scholarship search, information about paying for college, lots on there, so definitely get on there. We also have events coming up regularly. If you're ever wondering what events we have, you can get on cfnc.org/events. Okay, so we have a lot of things, a range of events from for high school audiences all the way up to adult learners. So definitely keep on track with what we've got going on. And one way you can keep track of what we've got going on is actually to sign up for our newsletters. So we have newsletters for CFNC, just general, college awareness and paying for college kinds of events. But we also have one for saving for college, the 529 plan, and NC Assist. So if you're considering taking out loans or continuing on this education journey and you want to get some of that nuance in there, you can sign up for any or all of these. So please feel free to either scan scan that QR code, or you can go again to cfnc.org, scroll to the bottom, and you can sign up for our newsletters. And finally, we do have a variety of platforms on social media. That's where a lot of folks find out about our events. We kind of drive them to cfnc.org for registration, but a lot of folks do follow either their local representative like me or Miss Tamika, or they follow our general account on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We also have a number of resources on our YouTube page, which is also where this recording will end up. So feel free to go back and view this and hear these words of wisdom once again if you need them. And we are so appreciative for you spending your time with us today. Thank you all so much from CFNC and from our wonderful panelists. We appreciate you joining us for this time, and we hope you got some good information to help you on your journey.